Okay. So, the subject of this talk, as you can see here, is the oil crash. I'm going to explain what is the oil crash and why these issues are urgent for all of us. So, the outline of the talk is as follows. So, first I'm going to present the problem. So, I'm going to talk about what is peak oil, which is the main concept concerning the arrival to the zenith, to the maximum of production of oil. What is the oil crash, which is the main subject of this talk, and when this thing is going to happen. Afterwards, I'm going to present the present situation. So I'm going to discuss which is the connection, the identified connections between the economical crisis and peak oil. How, in the later times, we're observing that there are growing concerns about the problem in the institutional industrial media, and why industry proposed solutions cannot work. The substitutes which have been proposed to substitute oil are not going to work. Then I will present two extreme examples of two countries which suffer a sudden decay in the amount of oil they consume. From these two examples, we will try to extract some lessons, but this should be taken with a bit of care because we are talking about two communist dictators, so North Korea and Cuba. But anyway, this can give some hints about what to do and what not to do. And finally, I will discuss about how to cope with oil prices. So first of all, the statement of the problem. So what is peak oil? Natural resources cannot be mined, cannot be extracted at a constant rate. On the contrary, the extraction typically follows a production curve. So, concerning oil, people typically think that extracting oil is something like this thing. So you have a straw, and you have a glass, and all what you need to do is to suck it, even as if this is oil, you are supposed to have a lot of pressure from the overlying rocks, and these are pressing the liquid, and the liquid will be emerged by itself. But this is not the real situation. The real situation is more like this one. So that like a sponge. So what we have really is a sandy rock, and in fact oil is occupying the porous, the interstitial space inside, and when you prick with the straw, when you are drilling a well here, what happens is that by pressure, of course, oil is flowing by the porous media, but as fast as you are removing oil from there, rock starts collapsing and blocks the path of further oil, and then you will need to either push oil, injecting water, vapor, or whatever, or even making an explosion inside in order to favor the flow of oil. And at a given moment, it will be no longer interesting to you trying to crack even more the rock to extract in different points, because the only remaining oil will be just small droplets interspersed in the medium. And as a matter of fact, what you want is to obtain an energy source. And if you make such a big effort in order to retrieve the latest drops in the reservoir, you are going to lose energy. So at the end, you need to stop at some point. The question is that production follows a curve. And one of the first persons to speak about the curve related to oil production was Hubert. In the early 50s, Martin Hubert proposed a model which fits with good accuracy with the oil production of different fields, wells, and regions, and so on. His deduction is based in two basic assumptions. The first one is that the probability of new discoveries depends on the amount of the oil which has not been yet found. Okay, which is rather logical. At the beginning, it's rather easy to find even more fields, but as far as they become more and more scarce, they are more difficult to find, and of course the probability of finding these diminishes. The other hypothesis was that the known resources are exploited with maximum efficiency, which of course this is an ideal model. It's not a realistic description of how oil extraction works, but there is some ideas of this.
So the result with these two assumptions is a logistic curve in which you can see here, these are reserves, these are how it reserves the amount of oil that you can still exploit, how it evolves with time, which is the maximum that you can recover divided by this, okay? And production is just minus the derivative, the time derivative of reserves. And the result typically looks like this. Bell-shaped curve needs not to be symmetric, it depends on the two parameters that you have here. So you have from on one hand A, which relates to the probability ratio of finding more oil, and B, which is related to the extraction efficiency that I have previously commented. And as an example, you can find here the fitting of Norway oil production in North Sea. So as Norwegians are very efficient people, they exploit the resource in a good fashion, and you can see that the fitting is rather good. In fact, oil production in North Sea by Norway has decayed about 1/3 of its maximum rate, about the peak. Okay? Something which is important to understand, which is one of the lessons of this fitting, is that even in the real world, with more realistic curves, we cannot avoid two fatal consequences of this curve. That in fact, oil is extracted with a fast increase first, and at the end it will decrease fast in exponential manner. If efficiency is improved, both ascending and descending phases are accelerated. You are ramping up very fast production, but as the amount of oil is the same, you are also going down very fast. If efficiency is lower in some way, for instance in Russia, when the collapse of the Soviet Union, in which of course the oil fields were not exploited in the most efficient manner, or voluntary, as it happens with OPEC, which they decide to retain a part of the possible production just to control prices, typically Saudi Arabia. So you can obtain a plateau, okay? But in that case, you are giving up to a part of the production that you could eventually obtain. Something also important, which sometimes is confused when discussing this issue, is that the probability of discovering new oil fields is included, in fact, implicitly in the deduction. Okay, so the only way to change this, the way in which the curve is going to behave, is to include different resources. In 1956, Manuel King Hubert foretold that the production of oil at the United States would attain its maximum at about 1970. Everyone at that time didn't believe him, because oil production, in fact, was ramping up very fast. So this is the time in which he made his prediction. As you can see, the production continues to ramp until attaining its maximum rate, its peak, by 1970, in fact. So, in spite of the huge efforts that the United States developed in order to avoid attaining the maximum rate, in fact, they attained that. And from there, they have declined by more than 50% of the maximum peak rate. And this has started 30 years of geopolitical instability, which in fact is we are still living on.
Excuse me, but in the US there are many resources which are not exploited.
We will discuss.
They keep them.
No. Excuse me. No. This is first of all, this is not true. And then I think that it will be. I think the best thing we can do is take an overview, and afterwards, if you want, we can discuss the details. But it is not true. As a matter of fact, the United States have exploited almost every resources they have the best way they have been able to do. Of course, you can usually see some statements of the media saying, we have this Alaskan National Reserve that can be exploited. In fact, it's being exploited. They are exploiting this. The part they are not exploiting is because it's not very easy to exploit. It's something similar to what happens with deep water oil. In fact, you can try to exploit that, but this is very dangerous, and sometimes you cannot manage all variables. Another important thing is that the amount of oil that you can recover there in extreme conditions is in fact very little. But if you compare with prefer to go ahead and then we can discuss on that. So what is the oil crash? Anyway, this curve I have presented is the actual production of the United States. Not counting Alaska. Alaska is something separate, but in fact it is not changing the decay rate. And in fact Alaskan fields are also decaying now. So the oil crash is the impending and avoidable arrival of a point in which our society, which is basically in a huge consumption of oil, will no longer be viable. The oil crash does not mean running out of oil, but running short of oil. We are not going to exhaust all oil. We are going to pass with less. If no measure is taken in order to avoid the dire consequences of this, economy, and in fact society as a whole, could eventually collapse. And, well, this is the data, this is actual data about oil production. Here you can distinguish two different curves. Blue curve corresponds to actual oil extraction, which is being pumped from below the ground. Okay? And as you can observe, this production is stagnant with a little tendency to decay during the last 5 years. And the red curve, which corresponds to what is called all liquids, is this curve of pumped oil plus synthesized oils which come from tar sands and biofuels and things of the like, which in fact are not real oil, they are synthesized using different energy sources. And even with this, which have a limited amount of capability to ramp up production, we are still stuck in this plateau. So, in fact, we are now starting the 6th year in which oil production has not grown, after having grown for about 2% at an annual rate. When will this oil crash happen? In fact, it's a process, and it's a process which has already started. We are studying the first stage of oil crash. According to Industry Task Force Peak Oil and Energy Security Group, ITPOs, supply crunchers are expected for 2012 in the United Kingdom, which is a production country, not like us. Okay? In the first report they made in 2008, they claimed that we could suffer supply crunches by 2012. In the latest report, they say, okay, a crisis has bought us some additional years, and the problem will arise for 2015. The severity, according to ITPOs, the severity and speed of oil scarcity will depend on the velocity of oil production decline. If, once the decline starts, the annual rate of decline is among between 2 and 3%, this will be that we will face dire adaptations, but okay, we can go ahead. If annual rate of decline is something between 8 and 9%, this means a catastrophe. So, Fatih Birol, which is the chief economist at International Energy Agency, which is a public body, chairs on giving advice to all OECD countries, including Spain, of course, stated in August 3rd, the last year, that the decline of the 75% of most productive fields were already at 6.7% of decline. This decline is being compensated by the new wells, by the new fields that are being developing right now. The problem is that the new fields that we are in a hurry developing to compensate this decline have much less oil, and if this decline continues in such a huge decrease phase, we could probably be soon in a situation which is closer to a catastrophe than to a hard time. Okay, I will discuss now about the present situation. So something which needs to be clarified is our crisis, our present crisis is an economic or energetic crisis at the end. So the fact is that the oil production plateau is already causing oil crash, and it's already causing dire economic times. And I think it's interesting to see this curve. So you can see here, this is oil consumption for different countries. This is OECD, which includes us, the United States, and Western countries in general. You can see here the decline in consumption during the oil shocks in early 18th, then the ramping in consumption until 2005. And since 2005, that production has not been able to be ramped, our consumption is declining at a rate of about 3% a year. Because other countries, and especially this purple curve here, which represents countries which does not belong to OECD in Asia, which is mainly China and India, they are escalating in their consumption in a very fast way. And this is a zero-sum game. So if the production is constant, if they go ahead, they climb, we need to climb down. At a present rate of consumption, and in fact, this graph was made a year ago, and including present year data, we are following these lines. So at the present rate of evolution, we probably will decrease our consumption by 30% with respect to our peak consumption by 2015. The correlation between energy consumption and the gross inner product suggests that present economic crisis is in part due to oil. So you can see here that the correlation with the gross domestic product and the consumption. This is a world gross domestic product expressed in purchase parity, and this is the total energy consumption, not oil, expressed in millions of tons of oil equivalent. As you can see, there is a reasonable good correlation between the increase in energy consumption and the increase of the gross domestic product. And in fact, the converse is also true. When there has been some period of decline, of the decreasing of gross domestic product, there has been also a decrease in energy consumption. Something that should be understood is that price is not a well estimator of what is happening exactly with oil production, because price tends to be very volatile due to the tight relation between offer and demand. So, as you can see here, this is a representation of oil prices for the last 65 years. And this is the price of West Texas Intermediate barrel of oil, expressed in constant, discounting inflation, in constant dollars of 2008. And as you can see, the peak of prices 2 years ago is an historical maximum expressed in constant dollars. So something what happened at that moment is that the prices were so high that a part of the economy could not follow up. So this part of the economic crisis, some activities should be abandoned, and this reduces the demand of oil, and this pushes prices down. And then they arrive to be $36 a barrel, and after that, by the beginning of 2009, after that, prices have slowly start climbing until the present value, which is about $86 a barrel. Price evolution will be strongly non-linear, with spikes and fast decreases in a growingly faster sequence. So, we are now over here, we have experienced an oil spike, and well, a part of economy, Western economy, has crashed, demand has fallen, and as China continues to grow and as we start to recover, we are putting more pressure on oil. Offer that's is not able to follow all demand, and this will eventually force, probably in the next year, a new oil price spike. And this until the point in which another part of the economy crashes, another part of economic activity ceases to exist, and then oil prices will again fall down, and once again, until we start to have the decline on oil production. That could happen in 2 to 5 years.
Excuse me, this type of prediction,
No, it's not predictions, I guess.
each peak has a higher maximum than the previous one.
Not necessarily.
Okay, so that what you draw there is not necessarily like
No, yeah. For that reason, I have not put any label.
that.
I mean,
But it's clear that the peaks go up, and you tell me that this is not necessarily so.
not necessarily true. They haven't. I mean, it's much more complicated than that because some studies, for instance, there is a study by Professor James Hamilton of University of San Diego, San Diego, which states that in fact, which impedes crisis is when the oil bill exceeds about 5% of your gross domestic product. And in fact, if you are in recession, this level lowers.
So my point is that this transparency is just an imagination of something that could happen in this way.
No, it is going to happen in something in a way similar to this. I mean, this is not a prediction, it's not a forecast. It intends to explain that you should not expect price to go up and stay up for long. Instead, you should expect something as this is so extraction.
Then there is no reason to expect why the peaks are higher and higher.
No, not necessarily. No. It depends. I think
They
that
may be lower and lower.
not necessarily there. No. I think that this is a technical question. That my point of view, my personal feeling about this is that next oil spike is going to be lower than the previous one, but the following one probably is going to be higher. I could explain this later. So, which are the consequences of oil crash? So, something that we should understand is to which degree our economic activities are very dependent on oil consumption. And I exemplify this for the case of Spain. So, ordering in a somehow subjective way impact levels. So the first perceptual category, in fact, of impact, when you say, okay, oil prices are ramping, so what are you going to do? Okay, I'm going to take less frequently the car because it's very expensive. Okay, but cars are just one of the variables which are included in the use of oil, because you also need to take into account that to transport goods from one place to another, you need to expense a lot of oil. For instance, using trucks. And maybe you remember the truck drivers strike in May 2008, because in fact they were protesting because of the prices of oil. Also, this affects traveling, especially plane traveling, but in fact all ways of traveling needs a lot of energy, typically a lot of oil, and it's clear that if oil prices climb, this is going to be difficult to maintain this. In fact, an analysis that I have recently read from a guy from the World Bank stated that airlines could not support oil prices beyond $80 per barrel. So something which is also important, which needs a lot of oil, is the use of machinery in general. So we use a lot of machinery for building and for maintaining infrastructures, and especially for maintaining the electric grid. Also, petrochemical needs a lot of oil. You should just see around you, and you will see a lot of plastic. We use oil to derive plastic, but also reagents that we use, for instance, to make medicines and other products. And something which is important is that the impact of the increases in oil scarcity are going to affect plastics and reagents in two different, that other sectors. Because once you have a barrel of oil, you have first to decide if you take this to make plastic or reagents, and this is affected by price. Afterwards, once you have the finished product, you need to transport it, and so oil price is going to affect it once again. And another important question is electricity. 1/3 of Spanish electricity is obtained burning fuel and gas. So, as we will see later, gas is going to follow a similar production curve, and this implies that we are going to have hard times in order to maintain our electricity supply. So, in a second impact level, we have car factories. Cars are typically the main manufacturer in Western countries, also in Spain. And in Spain, 8.5% of active population works in this sector. And this sector, if you are not going to use a car, probably you are not going to buy a new car. And this sector is going to suffer a lot, and probably in the long end, they need to be completely disappear. Another important sector for us is tourism. In Spain, tourism represents 12% of the occupation of active population. And of course, this is a discretionary expense. And if you have problems, your research probably are not going to make a very long trip to the beach or something of the like. Probably you are going to stay home. And as I have said, this affects a huge part of the population, of the workers. Of the workforce. Another sector which is very affected by the increase in prices and by the effect of oil scarcity is agriculture. We are obtaining a great yield from our fields because we are injecting a great amount of energy on them. Because we are going with tractors, we are injecting energy when we put fertilizers which have been derived from gas. We are injecting energy when we are using pesticides, we have it derived from oil, and afterwards for the processing, manufacturing, and distribution. In fact, at the United States, it's calculated that for each calorie that arrives to the dish, they have been spent about 10 calories of fossil fuels. Another activity which requires a great amount of fuel is fishing, because you need to go farther and farther away in order to catch the remaining fishes in the sea. And of course, this implies a lot of fuel. Something which is also important is water. Water requires a huge amount of energy to be transported, especially to big cities. Afterwards, it needs to be processed, potabilized in order to allow you to drink it. And afterwards, it needs to be processed as wastewater in order to avoid the propagation of diseases. And afterwards, healthcare is going to be affected. If you have less reagents from petrochemical, you have less electricity, you have more diseases caused by a poor treatment of water, you are going to put more pressure on healthcare services, and you are going to have to run into troubles easily. As a third level of impact, we have the state. So, taking into account that the state obtains its budget mainly by taxes, but taxing an economical decreasing activity is going to give you a lesser revenue. At the same time, you have a ramp in the amount of people which are calling for state help, for instance, unemployed. So, it's clear that at a given moment, the state should decide if which activities they can cover and which activities should be abandoned to their hope. Something which is also important is that concerning public employees, when I started making this talk more than a year ago, I was talking that okay, if we are going to have a big inflation and your income is going to be frozen, so probably you are going to diminish your purchase power. But in fact now they have even reduced our income by a 5%, and then they start saying now that probably they are going to reduce a further 5%. So it's clear that even for public employees, this reduction in the state income is going to have a huge impact. Another important question is about social order. Just taking into account in the case of Spain these two sectors, if they are completely destroyed by a huge oil scarcity, this represents an additional 20% of unemployment, which adding up to the present 20%, it represents 40%, just direct employment. It's easy to understand that having 40% of population unemployed is not going to be easy, and probably there are going to be some social problems, and of course, mainly when people need to obtain something to eat. And finally, households. The instability of employment, the problems with loans, credits in general, there is a situation to a point in which households are going not to be very stable. So, what about oil crash and the media? Until very recently, mass media did not take the peak oil issue very seriously. And I insist in mass media because if you go to specialized scientific journals, you can see that these issues have been discussed for almost 30 years ago, since 40 years ago. But even so, factual information has always been objective. So the data they are presenting are not manipulated, they are the actual data, and you can see the different issues of a paper, of a newspaper informing you of the production. You can see that, of course, these data are correct, and in fact, if you can connect the dots, you can see that, in fact, production is not climbing anymore, and in fact, we are going to run into troubles. The most likely cause for this downplaying in media is emotional denial in different forms. I'm going to explain this a bit later. Even those who know the truth must remain silent, and I think that's a significant case of this is present Secretary of State of Energy, Steve Chu, which is a Nobel Prize, in fact. And this guy, when he was the head of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, he made in 2006 a presentation in which he discussed about peak oil and how this could affect and the effort that the society should do in order to avoid this. And in fact, it's funny because one of his slides with the prediction was that peak oil will be around 2010. But of course, now he cannot recognize this in an open way because it could cause some troubles to the market. So, concerning emotional denial, so there are 4 typical ways of denying that a problem of this magnitude could happen. The first one is skepticism. So, okay, this is impossible. Your explaining is so huge, it's impossible that something of this kind will happen. If you insist, you give more arguments, you explain things, you explain the facts. The following part is, okay, faith in demiurge. People in charge have already thought about this, they have some plans. They have planned something in order to avoid the most dire consequences. A variation of this is faith in progress. Well, scientists have discovered some new energy source and something of the like, and a technological breakthrough will save us. And in case everything else fails and you insist and you show, you can have always a disqualifying attitude. You are a doomer, you are explaining the apocalypse, I don't believe you, and so on. Something that always happens that when I arrive to this point of the talk is that I make a statement. I know by sure that among you at that moment you have one or more of these attitudes of emotional denial. I'm sure. This is normal, but it's irrational at the same time. It's irrational at the same time because I know the facts. I'm going to show you further information, further data, and you don't. But it's very logical, it's very normal, because you make this appreciation of reality based on your prior desires, and you search for a posteriori justification of what you are thinking. Something that I strongly recommend to all of you is to search the data. You can survey the internet, you will observe that there is no controversy at all. There is no controversy about data. Another thing is forecast. But about actual data, you will observe that everyone is saying exactly the same. And you will observe the fact that the situation is not rather good. And it doesn't seem to be rather good in the future. Anyway, you should search for truth, and arrive to understand the issue by yourself. I could extend a lot about oil crash denial strategies in mass media, something which are more guilty than others. But I would prefer just to put this example, which is quite repetitive, and I think that you are going to run to step on one of these probably in a close future. So the typical example is anumerism. So mass media abuse of the fact that people are not able to make a simple division when figures are a bit large. So this is the case of the new oil fields, and the things run like this. Some company has found a very huge reservoir of oil which contains 1 billion, American billion, not Spanish billion, barrels. It has increased its reserves by 20%, whatever. Okay, so 1 billion barrels. It's very huge. 1 barrel is 160 liters, so it's very, very large. Boom. It's a circle, an ellipse, like this. 1 followed by 9 zeros. It's very, very, very large. But in fact, present oil consumption, daily oil consumption, is a rather big circle anyway. So 85 million barrels. And when you make the division, you take 12 days. So a very huge oil reservoir having 1 billion barrels will give you oil, in case you could exploit this at maximum rate, which is never the case, for just 12 days. In fact, things tend to be worse because more frequently they confuse reserve and resource. Resource is what is there, oil. Reserve is the part that you can obtain in an economical way, which is typically about 30%. The other part is so dispersed, which is very difficult to obtain. You need to expend more energy than the one you are going to retrieve. But okay, let us be conservative and assume that you could retrieve about half in the cases in which there are confusing reserves with resources. And another important concept is that of energy return on energy investment, which is the amount of energy you obtain compared to the amount of energy you need to invest in order to retrieve this energy in the first place. When you are drilling a well, when you are pumping water, you are consuming large amounts of energy. And you need to take this into account because at the end you want to win energy, to have an energy source. And for instance, in cases of deep water oil fields, your energy return on energy investment may be as low as 2-to-1. So you are going to obtain just 2 barrels of energy for each barrel you are going to consume. And taking this into account, these 12 days are even further reduced to just 3 days, which is not very right, in fact. During the last decades, oil companies have disguised this problem as much as they have been able to. And this is a fun example. It would be funny if it was not so green. But this is a fun example from a report of ExxonMobil in 2004, in which they identified that the production will climb until 2004, 2005, something of the like. Demand will go by here, and production will go by there. And in the middle, we will have the required new production. They do not identify where this new production was supposed to come. So maybe some miracle happens and you are going to fill this gap. And if this is stupid, what do you think about this? This is from British Petroleum report, and this is okay, all the production during the last 70 or so years. And once you arrive to 2002, 2003, I think is the date of this report, they assume that starting from here, you just open it, you let it flow, you don't need to pump it, and you are going to retrieve all this soil until it's complete exhaustion. At that moment, it finishes. This is absurd, as we have previously discussed. In fact, you are going to follow a curve, something of this kind. Okay? So you are not going to be able to maintain a constant rate, but either you are going to observe a decline in production. And of course, this is going to last for longer, but you are going to have less by year. In spite of this long-term tendency to disguise reality, to avoid discussing about the vision, something has happened during the last year. This last year has been very special because for the first time there have been a lot of alarm bells coming from different public, industrial individuals that have started discussing about the possibility of an impending peak oil. Well, I'm going to summarize some of these facts. You can also, this is my blog, and you have, for instance, read about this in more detail than what I'm going to explain right now at this post. So, in November 9 last year, The Guardian publishes on its front page the scandal about whistleblowers at the International Energy Agency. It seems that concerning the confidences made by these guys to Lionel Badal, which is this journalist, United States is making pressure on International Energy Agency in order to change their forecast, to improve their forecast, because they fear that markets could crash if truth comes out to the light. So significantly, this guy, Lionel Badal, which was a journalist who covered the affair, was called to give testimony from the European Commission in past May. I will go back to this later on. December last year, José Sergio Gabrielli, which is the president of Brazilian Petrobras Corporation, national corporation, recognizes that peak oil will arrive during this year. On January this same year, Total CEO, Christophe de Margerie, states that the world will never go above 89 million barrels per day of shit. And peak oil, anyway, will arrive before 2013. And then we have a sequence of reports. First of all, in February, we have this report, The Oil Crunch, by the Industry Task Force on Peak Oil and Energy Security, which comprises 6 large United Kingdom companies. The most important of them is Virgin. And they state that the world is going to face dire problems concerning peak oil, and anyway they expect peak oil to happen by 2015. This is a report by the United States Army. In fact, they have made a lot of reports concerning peak oil and the national threat it supposes to the United States. And in the latest report, that of this year, they identify that we are going to run short of about 10 million barrels a day by 2015. On March this year, a French journalist, which is called Mathias Sinon, discovered that this other guy, Glenn Swindon, who is an analyst working for the Department of Energy of the United States, gave a presentation a year before to a group of industrialists in which he presented this graph, in which this is the demand and this is the production as foreseen by the Department of Energy of the United States. In fact, they were identifying that by 2015 we were going to run short of the same kind as the report by the Army. Mathieu Sinon contacted Glenn Swindon, asked him about this presentation. Glenn Swindon said that, yeah, okay, if there is no enough investment, we are going to have troubles. And 2 months later, he was removed from his place, and now he's working for a secret division. So he's no longer allowed to speak about this question. In June this same year, we have this report. I strongly recommend you to take a glimpse on that. By Lloyd's, which is the biggest insurance company in the world, a Britannic company, in which they identify very dire consequences for world economy as a whole, and they foresee a possible supply crunch by 2013. In September this same year, German army, the armies are very active in this question. They talk about an impending peak oil. They state that probably our geopolitical alliances should be changed and we should be maybe less stringent concerning the respect of human rights. And even they claim that maybe democracy in Western countries is on risk. And finally, in September this same year, this Australian Institute make a report about peak oil, stating the peak oil disclosure and so on. And in fact, I have several additional, for instance, New Zealand Parliament has stated an issue and report of the same kind. Okay. This continues to accumulate. In fact, it's something which is accumulating faster and faster. Some warnings from different institutions about the closeness of peak oil. And if you want to go to the media, you can, for instance, go to Evertex and consult different journals that they have lots of papers. For instance, in The Guardian, The Independent, The Observer, these three, and the United Kingdom. For those three, it's almost every week they are issuing an article about peak oil. Also, Wall Street Journal has a couple of articles on this. There's Spiegel, which in fact take the leak from the German army. La Vanguardia. In the last, you can consult this by internet. In the last year, you can find 9-10 articles about the issue. El País, which is a bit more shy about this question, they tend not to make a statement so strongly, but you can even find a couple of articles on this one. So, what about public institutions, governments and the like? So if they don't know this, what happens with them? Well, in fact, you could retrieve a lot of similar things in the net. That, for instance, in past June, Gaspar Llamazares stated a question to the government asking for a written reply, in which essentially he made these 4 questions. What do you know about this scandal concerning International Energy Agency? Who was in Brussels the day in which Leonel Badal was giving testimony there? What do you think that peak oil will arrive? And which measures are you thinking of implementing in case peak oil arrives? In fact, if you go to the web pages of many public institutions, you could find literally hundreds of documents about peak oil, the majority of them warning about the urgency and the severity of the issue. And the question is that this debate is public, but not publicized. So, well, in fact, you can go, if you want to know about these documents, I think that there are something which are very, very, very significant, as for instance, the review of the present energy plan for the Generalitat de Catalunya, in which they clearly state about peak oil and say that peak oil is a major threat and the society as a whole needs to adapt. And this is the plan which is presently implemented by Generalitat. In fact, some of the measurements they are taking now are according to this plan. Okay? But this is a debate that you cannot see very, how to say, clearly stated by our politicians and stakeholders. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss a bit fast about the solutions proposed by industry. So, of course, industry wants to go ahead with the same thing, business as usual, just changing oil by X, whatever. The big problem here is that we have no X to solve this equation. Oil is a very particular substance with a huge energy density. You have a lot of energy concentrated inside oil. It's a substance which has been formed after the accumulation of millions of years of algae was fallen in the sun, and afterwards they have been compressed with the huge tectonic forces of Earth crust, and this has created a huge reservoir of energy. In fact, it's a kind of pantry. We have been running on our pantry, and now the country is going to run up. The sole solution that we can really adopt is a change in the economic system. I'm going to make a fast review of the existing alternatives to oil. The first one, I think that here is unnecessary to discuss this, but this is a general presentation. The first problem is that carriers like electricity and hydrogen, they are not energy sources. They are just places to store energy. In order to produce electricity, you need to go to a plant, a nuclear plant, hydroelectric or whatsoever, and you are producing there electricity. And in the case of hydrogen, what you need is to hydrolyze water. You are just storing energy there, and this may be useful for some uses, but this is not an energy source, just a place to store energy, or to convert energy to something which is more useful. So, concerning real energy sources, we have first non-renewable, and first of all, even more oil. Okay, for instance, like tar sands. I don't know if you know about tar sands. You probably need to know something, because at the office I am not here, I have a poster about the exploitation of tar sands in Canada, an aerial view of it. So I guess that somebody here knows a little of this question. So, in fact, concerning tar sands, what they are doing is taking this greasy substance, which is mixed with sand, and they are taking 4 tons of this, heating this with water vapor. After separating this grease, they are hydrogenizing it with gas, and they obtain some substitutes, some synthesized oil, which in fact has just 70% of the energy power of oil. And we are doing this because in Canada they have a lot of gas, and they have another power source in order to produce this substance. But the problem is that its peak rate is going to happen very soon. It's very difficult to climb even more. Present production, which is not very high, something like 1.7 million barrels a day. And even and also they have a very low energy return on energy investment. Concerning gas, the situation is not much better than for oil. Its peak for the world will be around 2025, and for Europe, because gas is difficult to transport, it will be rather 2015. Concerning coal, there are huge reserves of coal. We are always being told that we have coal for 200 years and something like. This doesn't take into account the fact that China is now consuming coal in a crazy way. But the main problem with coal is that, it's like the same as with oil, it's not just a question of dividing reserves by present production, but the rate at which you can obtain. And concerning coal volume, the peak will be about 2025. But if you take into account the energy content, take into account that in fact not all the coals have the same energy, anthracites have the greatest amount of energy, and lignite has the lesser amount. A recent study has shown that in fact the energy peak for coal will be next year. Finally, what about nuclear energy? In principle, this is the logical alternative. We have lots of uranium, and even if it's not very popular, and we have a problem with waste management. But we could go ahead with uranium, but we have a little problem. Its peak was in 1980. At that time, they have a lot of uranium that was mined before. They didn't know how to do with this, so they decided to keep this. And afterwards, by 1990, the new nuclear plants that were being built start to take profit of all the mined uranium plus the previously mined, the reserves, the stored uranium. And the problem right now is that at this moment of the world, we are consuming about 70,000 tons of natural uranium equivalent. But the fact is that we are just mining 49,000 tons of natural uranium equivalent. So a bit less than 1/3 of our uranium consumption is coming from the stored uranium, and this stored uranium is going to run out. This is going to run out in 1 to 2 years. In fact, in the United States, 50% of all the uranium used in nuclear plants comes from the missiles that were removed by Russians with a program in which the Russians were supplying uranium to the United States, and Russians have said that they are not going to renew the contract, which ties them until 2013. So the United States is going to introduce a lot of pressure on the uranium market. Another additional point that I think that you should know, as reported by London Times, past year there were some blackouts in France. France depends heavily on uranium for its electricity production because French company Areva was not able to supply enough uranium to Electricité de France nuclear plants. And in fact, France is now performing a lot of activity in Central Africa in order to ensure its supply of uranium. Finally, talking about renewable sources, we have biofuels, biodiesel, bioethanol. The main problem with this, we are talking about land-based cultures, is that the ROI, typically in our latitudes, is very low, sometimes even lower than 1. So in fact, it does not make sense like an energy source. And the fact for which it was denied is because it has subsides. It was subsidized by the state. Only in Brazil, with sugarcane, you can obtain a medium ROI. Something which is important about the return to energy investment is that in order to maintain something similar to a society, there are lots of studies about that, you need to take sources which have an energy return on energy investment higher than 5, some offers say 5, others offers say 10 to 1. So you cannot run a society, at least very similar to our society, with such a bad energy source. Concerning hydroelectric has a huge energy return on energy investment, but we cannot run it very much. Concerning Spain, Franco made a good job. He built a lot of dams, and in Spain the expansion is very, very low. And worldwide it could be about 2 times the present amount, but it's very small. So we cannot rely a lot on that. Concerning solar, concerning sun, we have a lot of problems here, especially concerning photovoltaic cells. The first problem is material scarcity. The most efficient performance cells relies on rare earths, and China has arrived to control almost all world production of rare earths, for instance tellurium, which is important for making the most performant photovoltaic cells. And in addition, they have very low energy return on energy investments, and others even have the opinion that maybe it's lower than 1. Anyway, in the case of Spain, if we want to produce the same amount of, not really energy, but power, as we're consuming right now, we will need to fully cover 2 Spanish provinces to do the same amount of energy. And in order to keep this clean, we will need to expend something like 80 hectometers of water every year, which is similar to the Trasvase Tajo Segura. Okay. Concerning wind has some potential, but its expansion will be necessarily moderate. And in case of like Spain is a country in which the wind doesn't blow very strongly over all its territory. Here, the wind blows very strongly. Where I live, the wind blows very strongly. But if you take Spain as a whole, the amount of energy that you can retrieve from wind is rather low. In fact, if you want to obtain the same power like we are now consuming, you will need to cover Spain fully with aerogenerators, with windmills. Finally, concerning other energy sources, we have biomass, geothermal, tidal, and these have, in fact, very low potential. Okay, I have said that it's very difficult to cover our necessities, But the question is, how much energy, in fact, are we talking about in the case of space? So, as I have said previously, the problem is not energy, but power, the amount of energy we consume by unit of time. Total annual energy consumption in Spain is about 6 exajoules. This is equivalent to an average power of 200 gigawatts. In comparison, in Spain, average produced electric power is just 30 gigawatts. And from these 30 gigawatts, in fact, 10 gigawatts are obtained by burning gas and fuel. And about 8, 9 come from nuclear. So, just concerning renewable sources, you have about 10, 12 gigawatts of electricity power being produced right now in Spain. And if you want to attain 200 gigawatts, you need to multiply present power generation by renewables by a factor of 20. But in fact, it's even worse, because Spain, in fact, externalizes part of its necessities. And if we are importing steel from South Africa, if we are importing aluminium from Canada, they have previously transformed this commodity, and they have consumed a lot of energy doing so. And in some sense, we are consuming this energy. So probably our energy necessities, in order to maintain the same status like now, the same consumption as now, is probably to multiply our renewable power by a factor of 40, something of this kind, which is plain impossible. So now I'm going to present very fast. This is the scary part of the presentation. So 2 extreme examples of countries in which suffer a sudden decrease in its oil consumption. So the first case is North Korea. It was an industrial country consuming about double oil per capita than in Japan, and double than China and half than Japan. The collapse of the Soviet Union drove to oil scarcity. Their imports declined by 40% approximately in just 6 years. In front of this emergency, North Korea bet to maintain an industrial autarkic system. And on top of all that, in 1995 and 1996, they suffered for severe floods that destroy infrastructures and topsoil. So the consequences of all that was that in a few years, infrastructures, especially the electric grid, failed, and everything was out of order. Grain production from fields dramatically fell, and a famine started. It's calculated, and some people have told me that this is a moderate estimate, that 1 million people over 23rd have starved to death. And in fact, even now, 62% of children suffer from malnutrition. In fact, North Korea has not collapsed because the United Nations issued a program to provide them with rain, and now the situation is a bit better. But in fact, they are still in rough problems. Concerning Cuba, during the Soviet era, Cuba imported a large amount of food and almost all oil. But the collapse of the Soviet Union and the blockade of the United States made that the imports fell by 85%. And this caused that in several years, the typical caloric intake fell from 2,900 to 1,800 calories. During the critic years, periodo especial, it's some additional 7,500 deaths can be attributed to food scarcity. And probably this estimate is also a quite moderate one. Which measures were implemented in order to avoid these problems? So, after some random erratic first measures, Cuban government took two basic measures to prevent collapse. The first one, they stated food programs aiming disadvantaged social classes. And the second one, they stated a rationing program for food for all the population. In addition, they start aggressive agrarian reformation, a progressive incentive ruralization, and increase the amount of money dedicated to research in agriculture. It has allowed to keep a reasonable enough food level in the middle of the misery, of course. Cuba, in fact, has not attained energy independence thanks to their friend Chavez, but has shown that the goal may be achievable in some direction. So, how to cope with oil crash? So we have two available alternatives. The first one is to take the blue pill, to ignore the problem and go ahead with business as usual. The second one is to take the red pill, that we are not going to have superpowers, and take an active position and favor a model shift, which can be the outcome of the first alternative, probably. If we do not anything at all, this will drive us close to the North Korean model. So the real alternative, I'm sorry, is to take the red pill. The main step is awareness. You should be conscious about the problem, you should be informed about the problem, and you should take decisions taking into account this issue, which is going to mark the rest of your lives. The second step is to promote and to accept measurements driving to a model shift. And what do we mean by a model shift? We need to change a model, as this one, which is based on consumption, to a model based on sustainability. What implies, for instance, just to make some savings and take profit of the energy we have in order to change the model. First of all, to remove private accommodation. We have about 1 billion cars in the world. They consume about a fourth of all the oil we are consuming right now. If we are removing this, we are going to gain some time in order to implement the changes. We need to localize production and diminish network size. A real example about how present-day networks work is, for example, an apple collected at Minnesota travels to Japan to a processing plant, and afterwards it's consumed at California. This is absurd. It's calculated that in the United States the typical distance piece of food makes is about 2,500 kilometers. So it doesn't make sense if energy is going to be scarce, it's going to be expensive. So we need to reduce these networks and to localize production. And finally, to remove the production of unnecessary goods, which is maybe another fourth of total oil consumption. This is going to be dire, but it's the only way to cope with the present situation. Concerning agriculture, we cannot any longer inject such a huge amount of energy to our fields as we are doing right now. So we need to make a deep agrarian reformation, which implies that agriculture will require a greater amount of labor, maybe 30% of occupied of the workforce. It's a reduction in the amount of meat consumed is mandatory. A cow can consume as much as 100 men. So I think that if you cannot produce enough of grain, for instance, you need to reorder your priorities. Local consumption is necessary. This is, I think, quite obvious. We need to retrieve ancient culture techniques like fallow, barbecho, culture rotation, etc., to ensure sustainability. And finally, city gardening is an interesting option that in fact we have practiced during wars, and probably as this situation is going to look like a war, we need to retrieve this. Something which is important is that we don't know which is the current capacity of Spain, which is the amount of people that Spain can support by sustainable means, by the means that Spain is going to produce and renew year by year. Probably it's going to be less than the present population. In the case of Mallorca, I think it's quite obvious. So we must take profit of the present energy availability in order to reduce our population in a non-drastic, non-violent manner. concerning industry, society will still need industrial production, but energy will be rationed, so processes needs to be optimized. Resources, commodities, human, will be local, but ideas can travel, so we need to produce locally, but we can diffuse ideas. Specific local necessities should be addressed. It does not make sense, for instance, in Greenland to produce air-conditioned devices, so the logical choice will be heaters. Design must favor reparation, maintenance, and recycling. We cannot throw away something because one piece is spoiled. No, we need to repair this. And we need to design things in such a way that it will be easy to repair, to maintain, and at the end of their life cycle, to be recycled. And we need to give priority to sustainability and environmental protection to the performance. So we need, in order to ensure that materials will be properly recycled, we are going to have a less performant computer. Okay, we need to take this choice. Concerning community, the interdependency among individuals will be stronger than now. Individualism is called to an end. Something which is important to be understood is that the solution, if it exists, will be for all or it won't be. This is easy to understand. It serves to nothing if you take shelter in your farm, far from everyone, when the people which are starving arrive there, and the first time you have 1 people, maybe you can project in, but then they will be 10, then they will be 100, then they will be 1,000. You're not going to be able to stop this. If you don't try to save the largest amount of people, you are not going to survive either. Food banks, to help the needed, must be constituted. We should not blame people who are unemployed because they are unemployed, because it's something that is going to happen to all of us, in fact. We need to give shelter to these people and offer the opportunity to work for the community using their skills in order to give us resilience, which is the key point in all of that. Resilience, which is flexible resistance to the changes. It is convenient to create cooperatives, producer-consumer, in such a way that the producer is guaranteed to sell his production, and the consumer is guaranteed to buy this at a fixed price. And finally, city gardening is recommended. It's a possibility to obtain some yield at cities. Arriving to the conclusion, I'm sorry because of the delay. Oil and all natural resources have limits. Scarcity starts not at exhaustion, but when offered and cannot follow demand. There are both scientific forecasts and evidences that show us that we are arriving to peak oil, to the maximum rate of oil extraction. And in fact, there is no alternative to oil, which is a highly energetic substance, which is easy to transport. It has a lot of uses and so on. Oil and energy, in fact, because we are talking in fact about energy scarcity as a whole, not specifically oil, undoubtedly will continue to rise for the following years. So, what can we do? This is the key point, the key question. The first part is to diminish personal exposure. And this in part implies do not take credits, do not take loans, especially if they are variable rate. Because as inflation starts to take hold on our economies, we are going to run into troubles if we have debts. Which interests are going to thin. So we need to try to avoid these kind of things, and also try to avoid taking some choices that exposes us more. Maybe we need to realign our career, even acquiring new skills. We need to understand that we need to help closer people, raising awareness and building communities to give us support each other. And we need to exert influence in favor of sustainable practices. Finally, we need to teach what is happening to the citizenship, and especially to young people. And that's all. This is my personal webpage of the Institute of Marine Sciences, and this is the address of my blog. And that's all. Thanks for your attention. Any question? It's completely clear.
Have I understood correctly that basically what you're saying, to avoid a total catastrophe on a global scale, we not only have to change our way in concerning economy and community and so on, but basically we have to get rid of capitalism, no?
It's you that have said that. Yeah, of course. But the problem is not blaming capitalism for the things it has brought to us, which are painful, but instead trying to understand why we have arrived here, and better on what can we do now in order to work. And that, of course, if materials are scarce, capitalism is no longer viable. It's clear. Yeah, of course. Something which is the main reason for which this kind of discourse is poorly accepted by politicians and by economical powers is because at the end you are undermining the very essence of what they are. So of course, but this is true. But it's a logical, not an ideological issue. Because, I mean, the question that we have no longer the possibility of maintaining this. It's not a question that we will not maintain this.
Well, I mean, you will not have the possibility of maintaining the consumer level, but if the prices increase, automatically capitalism even will see changes in all these things. And many of the things that you were pointing out will happen automatically if the price of oil because
but the problem is that capitalism cannot adapt to a situation of scarcity. Capitalism needs to growing economy. It needs a growing economy because we need to repay our debts. We need to serve our debts. In fact, we are sitting on a pile of debt right now, and the problem is that we need to repay this debt. And if we don't repay this debt, we're going to crash into the shit. And this is basically the situation we are now.
So your slides showed something like a traditional capitalist curves, demand and resources. But in the last few years, you've seen huge fluctuations because of speculations. Do you know how much that is going to move things forward?
Well, the speculation has an effect. I mean, something is. Normally you say speculation. But normally when people talk about the speculation commodities, they are talking about hoarding. Okay? So, has been any hoarding in the case of oil? Not in 2008. In fact, there is an interesting paper by Paul Krugman talking about this. And in fact, if you observe the contango, the contango is the amount of oil which is retained inside the tankers. And it's a way this is very funny. When you buy oil, but typically you will buy this for a month from today or 3 months from today. As far as tanks goes by the sea, it moves slowly. It may change over 3, 4, 5 times because they are exchanging this. And something which happens is that in the bad moments of the price, when oil prices were very low, there was a lot of contango. There was a lot of oil stored in the tankers, and the tanks did not move. But this not happened in 2008. Of course, there are always people which bet on oil rising more and more. But just betting, oil increases volatility. This is something which is very well known. Because as far as there are a lot of people betting that this is going to be increased, some people start to be interested in betting that this is going to decrease. This is just a game again. So the only way in which you can really affect prices, not increase volatility, but affect really prices, is by hoarding. But this did not happen.
It's not only true for a limited amount of capital, but if you have interest rates at 0% and 600 billion pushed on the market, then you speculate with values which are not even existing.
Yeah, but that's not really affect the spot prices. I'm not talking about spot prices. Okay, of course, if you are talking about derivatives, something of like, of course, you can do a lot of things. But derivatives are magic, a magic thing. I'm more interested not in futures, not derivatives, but the spot prices. And the spot prices, the only way to affect the spot prices is by hoarding. I mean, you can increase volatility, of course, but if you want to change, you need to hoard. In fact, the reason for which prices did not crash at the beginning of 2009 is because of hoarding. Because they made this contango, they stored oil in tankers, and this way they avoid prices to go too low. Okay? Something that, in fact, what is interesting also is that at this moment we need prices to move in a very narrow window. If oil prices go below this window, investment in upstream, in development and discovering new wells are no longer interesting because you are going to spend a lot of money. You know, for drilling a well, you need to spend from 100 to 200 million dollars, and you have one probability over 3 to drill a dry well. So you need to repeat the process another way and to spend the money again. And by now the average is no longer 1/3, but now it's 1/5. So things are going to be very crude. So the question at the end, excuse me, I lost my point. If the prices go too low, you are discouraging investment. And this investment is very important because the rate of production, the kind of production in present wells is very huge. We need to compensate this. And you decide, for instance, the investor decide, we are not going to drill this anymore because the prices do not compensate. We are going to run into problems in a few months because we need this new production. On the contrary, if prices climb too high, you are forcing Western economies in recession. And I mean, more or less this sweet spot as identified by the Saudi Minister of Oil is between 70 and 85 dollars. Just for your information, right now West Texas Intermediate is trading at 86 something dollars a barrel. So we are now outside the sweet spot window. So we are really a problem. We cannot allow oil prices to go too low, and we cannot allow oil prices to go too high. And probably, as the window narrows, we are going to make this. If we have not yet made it.
Did I understand about the uranium? Did I understand that you said that the peak of uranium production has been reached and will be finished in 3 years?
No. The problem with uranium is that right now we are 1/3 of the uranium we are consuming was stored previously during the 80s. And this storage is going to run out in 1 to 2 days. So we are going with 2 years. So we are going to lose 1/3 of our consumption. We are going still to have 2/3
of the reserves of uranium.
Yeah, there were the previous reserve is a bit confused because reserve normally you talk about the thing that you are below ground and then you can extract. So maybe it's better to talk about the storage. Okay, so this was already mined, it's already on the ground. Okay, and it's stored in some place, maybe in a nuclear weapon. And the question is that we are going to round out this part, which is 1/3 of our present consumption in 1 to 2 years. Another problem with this is that this storage
will be replaced by new mining.
Well, the question is mining is ramping up as fast as possible. We are trying to ramp up uranium production as fast as possible, but the problem is that we cannot do miracles. So this is more or less the production of mining uranium. Okay, this is the maximum peak, and the question is that you are probably going to follow this orange curve. These other two curves are the speculative. It is called like this: speculative reserves. It's funny, and in fact, these speculative reserves have proven to be not real in the case of the United States and France. So I do not rely too much on them. Of course, if we could be able to extend this, peak uranium will be 2035, as I have previously said at the talk. But I think 2015 is more likely. And this is not going to cover our consumption, which is more or less this line here. Our consumption is over there. And we are now taking this from the storage. And well, ramping up of production will probably go like this. So, in fact, for France, this is a real problem right now, especially now that we are going to winter, because the Areva is having really problems to supply uranium to electricity, of course. So that's something which is funny. I like Figueres, close to the French border, and they have made a very huge highway, electricity highway, which is called MAT, muy alta tensión. That is for collecting electricity grids, and in principle this was supposed to serve to allow France to export electricity to Portugal and to Morocco. Okay? I think right now it's being used to export Spanish electricity to France, which is very funny.
What you were mentioning as possible measures to avert the crisis, or at least postpone it, was all measures to decrease consumption, right? And since you denounced other methods of energy production or energy carriers, I mean, isn't that all we're going to do? Just to postpone the total crisis by reducing the consumption. But I mean, since you said basically all the other energy carriers were not viable as a substitute to feed our needs, our global energy needs, demands. So it's a pretty fatalistic view, no? I mean, so it basically says in a few decades or maybe 100 years, civilization will crumble because there will be no energy at all, or not to an amount that the whole world can sustain on that.
I have not understood your point.
What I meant was that the measures to postpone the crisis, to avert the crisis, was only to decrease consumption of energy.
Well, the question is not only, I mean, the urgent thing to do is to decrease consumption. But this is not adaptation. This is just decoying the problem. I mean, delaying it a little.
Exactly.
In the meanwhile, we need to adapt.
Okay, but how do we do that?
Well, so, I mean, I'm going to show you the slide. This one.
Okay, so transform the world to a more agrarian society. Okay, so probably cut life expectancy by 1/3 or so. Okay.
I don't know. I am a scientist, not a politician, but so who knows? But the question is quite obvious that society as a whole should turn more agrarian than less industrial and more agrarian.
This view about new technologies, you don't value them high enough to save us, so to speak. That's what you meant earlier.
You can trust whatever you want, but the problem right now is that we have not much time left. So as using just this precaution principle, I think the best thing to do is just to prevent the worst possibility, taking into account that it is becoming more and more real as time passes. At the end, of course, I hope that technology will continue to evolve and will produce different possibilities to avoid the worst outcomes of all that. But something which is important to understand is that we cannot continuously grow in a finite planet. I mean, as capitalism requires. Okay? So, in spite of any technical possible solution, at one point we need to remain stagnant, to stabilize. Okay? So, I think that so far, in fact, it's not a question of searching for different technological alternatives, miracles, but rather trying to avoid the first hit, or to make it as soft as possible. Afterwards, we can try to rethink how to refit the society in order to evolve, to develop us, let's say. But I don't know, actually. I mean, I don't know. I think that the main problem here is that as you are attempting against the basis of capitalism, this kind of discourse is never going to be accepted. It's very hard, even for you. It's very hard to be accepted. So the most likely thing is that we are not going to do anything at all. And I don't expect you to change your lives completely once you have recited this message. The only thing I expect from you, apart of trying to inform more about the issue, is that once the problems are more and more evident, maybe you will make better choices, knowing this. Because this really is the red pill. This changes completely your view of the world. I know very good, you already knew this issue, I don't know. But for the people here who have never been told about this is going to change his view of the world. And for instance, one of my claims is that we are not going to recover from this economical crisis. We are never going to recover. Our economy will do worse and worse year after year. And we are going to be deciding more and more in the shit. So, in spite of all the messages coming from me, they say, okay, we're going to recover the results and whatever, you are going to see that this is not going to happen, and maybe in the time in which the situation becomes really rough, your choices, knowing this, are going to be much better than the choices of any other else. And I think this is for me, is the main goal, to raise awareness. I do not expect miracles either. Okay? If you can buy a field and try to start to know how to cultivate, it will be a good thing.